Hello everyone, this is part 32 of What If Naruto Was in Anbu at 6, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. The shadows of the cloudless night sky hung heavily above the single, torch-lit deck of a ship as it heaved to and fro with the crashing of the waves against its hull. In the map room out of dining area of the ship, Hinata sat at the head of the table, rubbing her temples as she fought to stave off a headache. Behind her stood the captain, whom she learned was named Ishio. Idly pulling on his beard with his fingers, the man stared out the stained glass window towards the cloudless night sky. The silence between the two was broken as Ishio spoke. So dear Hyuga, with your leader S, who will be the one granting me my payment? He questioned offhandedly, almost tauntingly as he glanced over his shoulder at the Hyuga clan head. No one if you do not shut up. Hinata snapped. Indeed, rumors had been circulating around the pirate crew that the great devil king of Konoha simply must have S in the lightning attack. But she knew different. He was alive. He was always alive. Someone like him couldn't be K. If she would have taken a moment to examine that last statement, however, she may have scoffed at herself. Couldn't be K. Any man could be K, any adversary felled, she had learned this many times in her career. But she just couldn't help it when it came to Naruto. To her, and possibly the rest of the ninja force of the Leaf Village and its conquered allies, Naruto was simply the man that S. He was just short of God really in their eyes. Still, Naruto's life aside, he was not the reason for her current headache. No, the reason for her current headache was the Suna Kanoiki, whom the medics were still working on, making sure she would remain stable throughout their trip. With the limited equipment that was actually usable on this ship to help medically, she was surprised Temari was still even breathing. She did not want to contemplate just what would be the repercussions, both political and personal, if Temari were to S on her watch. She would like to believe that Naruto considered her more than a simple commander, but she wasn't willing to bet her life on it. Breaking her out of her thoughts again, was Ishio's arrogant and smug voice. Oh, hit a nerve did I, princess? He questioned before taking a seat next to her, charcoal black eyes glaring into her pale silver ones. What's the matter, eh? Feel the eyes of your enemies closing in around you now that your precious Devil King is S. Hinata scoffed. Please, if you think that such a simple technique could K him, then you are truly ignorant of his power. You ninja can't walk on the ocean's surface, I know that much. He stated as he leaned back in his chair. I also know that as we pulled away, not a single vessel that wasn't waving a Kumo flag wasn't sinking. If he's not S, he's captured, and if he's captured, then he's as good as S. Hinata outwardly scoffed. If he was captured, then the entire Kumaut Ofsuna coalition would probably be S by morning. Before any more could be said, a knock resounded at the entrance to the captain's private quarters. Hinata-sama, came the familiar voice of one of the medics. From what I recall, this is my ship, yet they ask for you. Ishio stated in a somewhat amused tone. Ignoring the increasingly annoying pirate captain, Hinata responded to the medic. Come in. When the door parted, it revealed both medics as they entered the map room, their clothes blotched with a few small B, though it seemed relatively minor, so Hinata wasn't panicking just yet. Final verdict? She questioned, see right to the chase. She's gonna make it, the medic said, wiping his hands before placing them on his hips, giving the air of exhaustion which he rightfully held. The incision on her end managed to see the internal jugular. Though the C was only millimeters wide, it was still causing trouble throughout most of the procedure. 3 of the brachiocephalic veins were severed and needed to be reattached. We also needed to remove much of the B that was already beginning to drown her. The second medic nodded, putting in his own 2 cents. That girl is either a walking miracle or she has a very strong will to live. Hinata sighed in relief, leaning back in her chair. She was willing to bet the latter. Captain, how much longer before we can reach the port of Wave Country? Few days, give or take. Your great and wise leader chose one of the best times to launch this attack. Yes, right when the winds are high and blowing from west to east, away from the mainland. Has he sailed many ships before? He questioned, his tone laced with sarcasm as the smug, taunting smirk remained firmly on his face. Hold your tongue, Captain. I don't necessarily need you to crash this ship into a beach and leave the wreck, she stated coldly, her patience quickly wearing thin. My, such a short fuse when it comes to your fearless leader. Don't worry, Missy, I shan't be bothering you anymore today. I still do have a ship to sail, he stated, giving a minor wave of his hand, complemented with a clearly over-exaggerated bow before he brushed past the two medics, closing the door as he stepped out. Hinata watched the captain leave, eyes narrowed as the door clicked shut. That man is either a real fool, or very dangerous. He's not even a ninja, Hinata-sama. What danger could he pose to you? One of the medics questioned, eyebrow raised with skepticism as he looked at the Hyuga. Anyone can be a threat, Chunin. Remember that, she stated simply, watching as the man nodded once in acknowledgement. Now, the two of you are to make sure Temari remains stable until we reach the mainland. The two ninja nodded before they stepped out of the room, leaving Hinata to her own thoughts. Jiraiya sighed as he walked over the deck of the ship, injured and ninja lined along its edges, pressed against the railing, with a variety of injuries from severed limbs to electrical burns. The light of the moon barely made it possible to distinguish the bee-stained wood that marred the deck. The were being tossed overboard as the risk of disease was too great, keeping them aboard to give them a proper funeral at the mainland. Jiraiya sighed as he rubbed his temples tiredly. This battle was a battle that they didn't have to win. But it was not easy to know that so many of their elites had perished in that lightning attack, worse yet to know that it was because he himself wasn't able to stop it. They went in with 100 elite shinobi, with over 500 ships. They were leaving now with barely over 30 elites, most wounded, and barely 20 ships, and 12 of those were probably in such horrible shape they wouldn't even reach the mainland. Still, all in all, the plan was in motion. It would have been better to win. But the defeat was not even a real wound in their war effort. One thing that was bothersome though was the lack of knowledge on where Ginchiko and Naruto were. He wasn't worried about Naruto, nothing short of a god could kill that boy. Whom he was worried about was Ginchiko. The woman was their supreme naval commander. She's the one who knew all the seafaring tactics, and if he wasn't sure if they had another to take her place. Last he heard from Hinata, she had gone after Mika. She may be back on the mainland, or one of the small islands that had been just a few miles away from the battlegrounds. As he walked up to the elevated platform of the ship, the voice of a certain Kanoiki brought a small smile to his face. Lee, I'll be fine, really, it's not nearly as bad as it looks. Jiraiya turned his eyes to the starboard side of the ship, where a doting Lee hovered over Tenten's sprawled form, clutching her side where a red blotch was clearly visible on her clothes. Let the man dote on you, Ten-san. In fact, take advantage of it, came the voice of Toshiro, amused as he watched the two, though his smile was quickly removed as a jolt of pain forced him to wince, clutching his side. Jiraiya smirked before changing his course. Though he'd never been close to any of the three, he'd spoken to each them on one or two occasions, and seeing them alive was a great thing in itself. So walking up to the three, he spoke to catch their attention. I'm glad you three made it out all right. Lee stood ramrod straight, bowing quickly before the toad Sanin. Jiraiya-sama. Walking forward with his cane, Jiraiya grabbed Lee by the upper arm before pulling him upwards. Come on, boy. You know I don't like formalities, he said before looking to Tenten and Toshiro. So what happened to you two? Tenten answered first. Piece of shrapnel from one of the lightning bolts caught me in the side. It didn't hit any organs, just tore into me pretty bad. Jiraiya nodded before looking to Toshiro. And you? The son of the green dragon sighed as he rested his head against the railing, wincing as he did. A blonde woman with AK right, AK left, hell, AK everything. At that, Jiraiya let a strange expression cross his features. Tsunade. You fought Tsunade. Tenten and Toshiro both nodded, though it wasn't without a painful wince. Jiraiya nodded. I see. You're lucky to be alive then. Either that or she's feeling the effects of her age even more than I am. Before any more could be said, a yell caught their attention, bringing their eyes to a ship pulling up next to their own. Hey, Frog Man. It was none other than Yoshihiro Shimazu standing on the torch-lit deck of the ship, his purple armor still firmly in place, though several cracks now lined its frame, including one of the shoulder shields which was thoroughly shattered, only a few pieces of the metal holding in place. Next to him was the ever-watchful Toyohisa, his spear in hand. My ship's sinking fast, Captain here estimates it'll only hold up for another hour. Jiraiya sighed, rubbing his temples. Fine. Bring the men aboard with all the supplies you have. The former Tsuchikage nodded before speaking again. You hear from our fearless leader yet, or is he still incognito? Jiraiya narrowed his eyes as he watched the Tsuchikage. Yoshihiro was always a wild card. Though he was always the favorite to be the first to betray them should the war effort go wrong. He had denied Zhu Liang's request to join the coalition, and had helped in quell many uprisings of his own ninja against Naruto. But still, though Naruto wasn't his absence could bring out Yoshihiro's true colors. He would need to be watched carefully. Not yet. He's probably already returned to the mainland. Yoshihiro seemed to snort from his place at the ship. Sure he has. Before turning and walking back towards the ship, barking out orders to the men as he went. Jiraiya kept his eyes on the retreating figure of the Tsuchikage before turning back to Lee, Tenten and Tushiro, whose eyes were also fixed on the rock ninja. Placing a hand on Lee's shoulder, he brought their attention back to him. I'm glad you three are all right. Make sure it stays that way. This war has enough s. Not saying any more, the Toad Sannin continued on his way. The cawing of gulls was the first thing that reached his ears, the unpleasant feel of water flowing beneath him, along with the sinking sensation of sand as the water pulled away. Naruto opened his eyes, grateful there was no glare from the sun in the middle of the night before he slowly pulled himself up, feeling the edge of the wave as it washed over his legs again, the back of his soaked cloak covered with sand. A slow, grating escaped his tea as he pulled himself to his feet, wiping his shoulders he began to look around. He stood on a beach, the sand giving way to rock a few yards inland, with the rock giving way to grass a few feet beyond that, which finally gave way to a dense tree line. It was thick and he could smell the moisture from here, indicating plenty of rain. It did not rain this much anywhere near Fire Country, and Kumo did not have any forests near this dense. Only Tea Country, just south of Wave, fit this description, and a few islands around Kiri. The odds that he was washed up all the way in Tea Country, bypassing nearly 1,200 miles of ocean, was ridiculous, so he wasn't even going to contemplate that he was there. Eliminating that option, he knew that he must be in one of the tiny islands around Kiri. Still, it wouldn't hurt to make sure. Eyes quickly finding a small mountain top to the far right of where he stood, the Jinchuriki calculated the relative distance before vanishing in a cloud of smoke with a shunshin. Reappearing just a few feet from the summit, Naruto made his way up the rest of the distance. His eyes shifted to red before he quickly began scanning over the expanse of land. Discovering that he indeed was on an island. A very small island, if he had to guess it was only 3 miles long or so. Naruto just barely resisted the urge to his forehead as he sighed in exasperation. How very annoying. Looking to the sky, Naruto registered the position of the North Star before his hands moved through a quick succession of hand seals. Kuchios. He muttered before a cloud of smoke surrounded his right arm. When it dissipated, it revealed a small blue snake coiled tightly over his arm. The creature's teal eyes shifted to Naruto's own, languidly awaiting its orders. You are one of the few snakes that can survive the cold of the open ocean. You are to carry a message to Kachi Suzume, in Konoha. She'll be at the tower. Tell her that I need transportation off of this island. From my estimation it is the 5th or 6th island of Kiri, though I cannot be certain. The snake slowly nodded. Yes, my master. Naruto knelt down, placing the creature on the earth before he pointed in the direction of the mainland, watching as it ate away. As Naruto stood, he glanced around the empty forest, deciding that for now it was best to find shelter. Konoha's ships were certainly not going to be the only ones patrolling the ocean, and if Kumo suspected that he was stranded here somehow, he did not want to take the chance that they would catch him unawares. I swear, those stinkin' ninja, always acting so high and mighty, one of the crew members grunted as he pulled on a rope attached to a pulley, raising a rope net loaded with barrels over an open portion of the deck that lead to the lower storage area. Aye, his crewmate replied as he pulled with him. Almost makes you wish they hadn't even offered the money. That way we wouldn't have to put up with them. Well, don't be worrying laddies, you won't have to be dealing with the little Hyuga girl for much longer. Came the voice of their captain, causing the 2 crew members to nearly drop their load in surprise. Catching themselves before they damaged both their alcohol or their ship, the 2 crew members straightened, with one smiling at the taller man. Aye, Captain. We'll be back in Wave soon. where we'll get our money and drop off those freeloading ninjas real quick. Ishio let his smirk slowly widen. Oh, we'll be getting our money all right. With a bit more satisfaction than simply dumping them back on the mainland. Watching the confused faces of his men, the captain chuckled to himself before walking off towards the helm of the ship. The doors to the captain's quarters on the ship were open, making a resounding bang echo through the closed space of the room. Bringing Zhuge Liang's eyes to face none other than the Kazekage, who was flanked by none other than Yugito and his brother Kankuro. Kazekage dono. Liang greeted with a slow nod. The greeting was ignored, however, as Gaara stepped into the room, the words spilling from his lips without pause or hesitation. Why are you stopping the search for survivors? Liang blinked languidly, taking a deep breath as he knew the real question the Kazekage was asking, but wasn't allowed to openly express due to fear of showing favoritism. Why are you stopping the search for Akina? Zhuge Liang sighed before he stood up, grabbing a small parchment from his desk before tossing it to the Kazekage, watching as Gaara caught the paper with his hand before bringing it closer in order to read. Reikage-sama. Gaara began aloud, feeling Yugito and Kankuro discreetly try to look over his shoulder in order to read as well. Situation on mainland has reached crisis. Leaf Ninja have breached through defensive lines Okami, Kappa, Taka, Tokage and Hebi. Force of an estimated 1,000 Leaf Ninja is now marching on the village. Expected to arrive in 3 days' time from when I write this message. There was a silence from the 3 stunned shinobi as they continued to stare at the message before the silence was broken by Yugito as she turned her eyes back onto her sensei. They're marching on Kumo. Liang's eyes closed as if in pain, taking a deep breath before he nodded. Yes. Kankuro snatched the paper from Gaara's hand, the massive appendage moving surprisingly quickly and without damaging anything in the cramped cabin of the ship. This message was written 2 days ago. That means they'll be at the village by tomorrow. That leaves us 1 day behind. Gaara finished, eyes widening as he looked up to Liang. You're bringing the fleet back to the village in hopes of arriving in time to organize a counter-attack. Silence was his answer. But you can't. The Kazekage protested, shaking his head. The men are all exhausted, at least half of them are injured, the others suffering from chakra exhaustion. Even with 2 days rest they won't be in any condition to fight. You're setting yourself up for AM. And what would you have me do? Liang suddenly yelled, startling the 3 with the display of anger that was rarely even associated with the sleeping dragon. His chakra spiked for a brief moment before being off rather abruptly, leaving a tired-looking Liang as he nearly collapsed, leaning heavily against his desk. I have no choice now. I knew when this naval battle started that we would be playing his game, and that I would have no choice other than to play by his rules. He has not only succeeded in weakening our overall shinobi force, but has also broken through our defenses, injured our already fragile economy, and now threatens to destroy our village for a second and final time. He paused before releasing a bitter chuckle. Our victory, if it can even be called such, probably helped him more than it weakened him. The less mercenaries return, the less money he needs to pay. Liang slowly fell back into his seat, one hand rubbing the bridge of his nose before the thudding sound of footsteps caught his attention. Opening his eyes, he looked to the Kazekage as the red-headed ninja stood across his desk. The Shukaku vessel's teal-green eyes seemed to shine in the torch-lit room before he slowly nodded. Suna is still your ally. This battle isn't one you need to fight alone, Zhuge Liang. The sleeping dragon seemed to start for a moment, staring at Gaara for a good long while. As if sizing him up. This was the moment that most cages would be seeking for a way to escape this alliance in order to salvage their own village's power and ninja. But here was Sabaku no Gaara, offering his help once again without even a hint of hesitation on his face. Though Liang could assume that his actions could be fueled by his sister's death, or the naivete of youth, Liang did not think that was the case. Though it was probably a factor, it was not the predominant factor, and that did surprise Liang. Still, shrugging off his confusion, Liang stood from his seat, bowing deeply before Gaara. Thank you, Kazekage. However, you do realize, this is one battle you may not come back from. Gaara shrugged. There's no chance that Uzumaki himself will be there. How much worse can the fights be? He answered simply before turning and making his way out the door, brushing past Kankuro and Yugito. Watching as Gaara walked out of the cabin and onto the deck, the thudding heavy footsteps of his brother soon followed him, before Kankuro's voice broke through the air. Bro, wait a sec, the puppet wielder said, bringing Gaara to a stop as he caught up to his younger sibling. What is it, Kankuro? The red-headed Jinchuriki questioned. Are you okay? Well, are you sure you're making this decision for the right reasons? Gaara let out a snort, half amused, half sad. From what I recall, you were the one that needed to be restrained by the Anbu when I told you yesterday. Kankuro's smirk was bittersweet. Can you really blame me? Gaara's smile fell from his lips as he sighed. No, I guess I can't, he said before walking over to the front of the ship, Kankuro following closely behind. The Kazekage leaned on the railing heavily before he took a breath. Kankuro, did I do this? Is it my fault? Did he do this because I decided to fight him instead of surrendering? Kankuro undid the clasps on his armored hand, opening the wooden suit to lay his real hand on Gaara's shoulder. Bringing his younger sibling's eyes up to him. Don't think like that, Gaara. This isn't your fault, you acted as any cage would have in your place. He chose to K Temari, he chose this whole damn war. Gaara slowly nodded, blinking away tears. Kankuro smirked, deciding to at least attempt to lighten the mood. Just promise me you'll make it slow. Gaara chuckled. And very painful, he finished before looking up to the night sky. Temari, sister, wherever you are, know that I will K him. I promise you that at the very least. So, this is Kumoe. Came the voice of a four-armed ninja as a larger man stepped up next to him. Doesn't seem like much. Bet that we'll take this city in a day, was the statement the man made as he came to a stop. The two were currently watching a city several hundred yards across an expansive plain, the imposing stone walls rising high into the horizon, and though they couldn't see anything beyond or on those walls clearly, it was obvious that whatever lay behind the fortification was scrambling to marshal their defenses. Do not underestimate them. Zhu Liang's strategic skills are legendary, he may have had a contingency for our advancing while he is away at sea. A white-haired man spoke up next, appearing next to the two a moment later in a swirl of leaves. Oh please, I'm sure your prissy A is just being paranoid again. Spoke a red-headed woman, appearing next to the fat one. Not even that twat-licking sleeping dragon could hope to stop us, even if he were here himself. She's right, Bones. Relax a bit. Even if Kumo's fleet does get back, we'll have breached the city walls long before then, and once we do that, there's no way to stop us. Spoke a feminine-looking man wearing purple makeup as he chuckled to himself. We are so going to tear this place apart, they're gonna need tweezers to pick up the pieces. Oh yay. The red-headed female responded with a smirk. This is gonna be good. Let us not forget, a final voice interrupted next to the five, bringing their attention to one cycloptic Junin, nose buried in his familiar orange book. That you five. Sorry, Akon, 6, are under my command. You'll conduct this assault according to my orders, he stated firmly, watching as varying expressions of discontent filtered across their faces. Even Kimimaro seemed displeased at the notion of not being able to finally see loose and really wreak some property damage. Kakashi smirked beneath his mask. And my orders to you 6 are. He paused for dramatic effect, watching as their eyes trailed back to him, a hopeful gleam visible in a few. Kakashi continued with a simple shrug. L them to pieces. Their eyes widened for a brief moment before identical smirks crossed their faces. Even the usually stoic face of Kimimaro held a minor upturn of the lips. As black marks spread over their skin, Kakashi slowly glanced behind him to the force of leaf ninja that were about to make their way across the plain. Well now, let's see how Kumo enjoys a full-on assault by over 2,000 of our ninja. The copy ninja stated to himself before turning his eyes back to his book, idly turning the page as the army made its way past him and the 6 next to him vanished before his eyes. Hinata grimaced as the continuous pelt of a leak directly above her forehead peeled her away from the realm of sleep and dreams. Growling in a way that would have made her cage proud, she sat up on the bed, glaring at the offending leak in the ceiling as if she were willing the water to evaporate and the wood to swell and seal itself up again. Of course, even the mighty gaze of the all-seeing Byakugan could not bend matter to the wielder's will, and so Hinata gave up in the attempt and simply moved her bed. Laying back down, the Hyuga clan head could only hope for a quick return to the world of dreams. But with her wakefulness came her thoughts and worries. Though she had faith that Naruto was alive, she could only speculate about the others. Ginchiko had gone off after Mika, and she wasn't sure which one of the two was stronger than the other. She had only heard of Ginchiko's abilities through word of mouth, and though she had fought Mika once before many years ago during the first campaign to take Kiri, she had really no idea just how much the Kiri swordwoman had grown over the years. So again, the results of their battle could only be speculated, if they'd even fought at all. Then of course there was Jiraiya. The Toad Sanon's skill was almost as revered as that of their Kage, and he was still, at the age of 60, considered the second most dangerous man in Konoha. Though Kakashi and the late Guan were beginning to threaten that she was confident he was still alive. Tenten, Tushiro and Lee, she knew were also part of the attack, and though she wasn't particularly close with any of them, except perhaps Tenten, she was worried. It was never a good thing to hear of a comrade's. And finally, Yoshihiro Shimazu along with his nephew Toyohisa. Personally, she'd be glad to be rid of the two. They were both wild cards, and she didn't trust Yoshihiro as far as she could throw him, which wasn't very far considering how strong the old man was. But those were her personal feelings towards their lives. Politically, so far Yoshihiro had proven to be a stabilizing influence over Iwa, and they needed him alive in order to make sure the entire area didn't erupt into civil turmoil, which would only cause more problems than they needed at the moment. So, she supposed, she wanted the infuriating old man alive too. The Hyuga matriarch sighed with frustration as she picked herself up from the bed, deciding that sleep wasn't gonna be coming back anytime soon. She decided that some sea air may be good for her. Answer, she put on her clothes and made her way out to the torchlit deck. She felt more than sore as the crew member who manned the helm snapped his gaze back to the horizon once he caught sight of her exiting the door. There were only a few others on the deck at the moment, and all were more than happy to give her a wide berth. Making her way to the front of the ship, Hinata allowed herself a brief smile as her long hair was caught in the wind, whipping out behind her as the salt water mist caressed her pale skin. Her moment was broken, however, by the grating, highly annoying, at least to her, voice of Ishio, the captain of this crew of sea and vagabonds that ferried him across the ocean. Well now, dear princess, what'll be troublin' someone like you enough to keep ye awake at this hour? His tone was friendly, but carried an edge of mocking just enough to let her know that his concern wasn't genuine in the least. Nothing that someone like you would ever need to concern yourself with, much less be able to comprehend. She replied in a dangerous tone. Claws out tonight, I see. He shot back with that familiar confidence that never seemed to leave him, even under the withering gaze that was directed at him. Oh, come now, lass, the older man said after a brief tense moment between them. Taking his sake jug from his hip and pouring a bit in the saucer in his other hand, he offered her some of the alcohol. Whatever's botherin' ya, I'm sure it's nothin' a good drink can't alleviate. Hinata had to admit, a drink sounded very good at the moment. She wasn't one to drink, but these last few days demanded some kind of fix. She eyed the offered drink for a moment before looking back at the captain. You first. The captain simply looked at her as if to say, oh please, before he downed the drink in a single gulp. Turning his eyes onto the Hyuga, he spoke as he poured a bit more sake into the saucer. Little princess, believe me, I have nothing to gain from Kya, and if I wanted US I'd do it much less upfront than this. Hinata activated her Byakugan for a split second as she looked at the jug, making sure there were no hidden compartments or anything before looking at the captain. She could read no deceit from him, only a hint of nervousness that suddenly shook him. Though that was common at the sight of a fully activated Byakugan, especially to non-ninja who are not used to such things. Still, she needed to wonder just what was underhanded in this captain's eyes if poisoning someone was considered, up front. Deciding to filter that to the back of her mind, however, she took the offered saucer before nodding. How very noble of you, she said before she drank the sake, relishing the sensation of the warm liquid trailing down her tea. Extending the saucer towards Ishio again, the pirate captain served her some more before pulling out another of the small dishes before pouring himself some more of the alcohol. Downing the liquid with a satisfied sigh, the older, bearded pirate decided to converse with his drinking partner. So Miss Hyuga, mind tellin' me why you're in this little game? What little game? Hinata questioned before she drank a little more. This little game of you leading armies, risking your life for a half-sooner girl, sailing across the great sea with nothing but two firm allies to have your back should anything go wrong. Seems like a losing game to me. He answered. This is no game, she said firmly. People's lives are at stake, as is the fate of this country, our country. RIC. He breathed, almost sarcastically, and what would your intentions be for the fate of our country? My intentions don't matter, only Naruto's intentions matter. She said firmly. He is our leader, and we fight for him. We, or just you? The captain questioned rhetorically before downing his sake. Hinata did not turn to look at him this time, instead looking out towards the inky black distance, contrasting sharply with the bright reflections of the moon against the ocean's glossy surface. Seems to me like you place an awful lot of faith on the character and integrity of your commander and chief, especially considering some of the things he is rumored to have done. And especially of the things he's known to have done. Poisonings, the S of entire families, manipulations of any kind to get what he wants. What's your? Hinata's sentence stopped as she turned to face the captain, the world coming to a violent and dizzying spin. Hinata felt her stomach lurch and bile rose up in her tea, sending her to a fit of coughs as she stumbled over the railing, barely managing to catch herself in time to avoid falling completely. Heaving coughs racking her frame as saliva slowly fell from her parted lips, dripping onto the wooden floor with her dry heaves. The point is, little princess, the captain spoke, walking around her, uncaring to her apparently failing health, that everyone is out for their own gain. Everyone, and your commander, and especially myself, are not above this rule either. So you see, since I have no intention of working to help fulfill his ends, I'm going to work on fulfilling my ends, and one of my ends is to get rich. Hopefully filthy rich. He paused, watching as several of his crew emerged from below deck, ropes, swords, torches in hand as they approached the downed Hyuga. Hinata continued to cough, her saliva now tinted red as she turned her pale eyes onto the smug Ishio, the darkening veil over her sight making his image deformed and blurry, but the smile was still clear. She didn't try to pick herself up, recognizing that her body was beginning to shut down. What toxin did he use? How did he even use it? She's seen the sake jug. There were no second compartments hidden in the muzzle of the bottle where he could have hidden any other liquid so that he didn't drink. Unable to come up with anything, she took a breath, even that proving difficult in her current state before she released a jagged, "How? Oh, nifty little drink we got there. It's actually a poison developed by some old hermit in the woods. Apparently he had a grudge against a ninja who his whole family several years ago, probably your commander for all we know, and so began to develop a poison that would specifically target ninja. The more chakra the person has, the quicker and the effects are. I didn't learn many of the basics before I the old goat, but someone of your level of skill from what I understand would probably become ill by tonight, but you want for at least another 3 weeks. More than enough time to get you back to Kumo or Suna, who I'm sure will pay quite a hefty price for your head, as well as your eyes." He smiled at the last part, a gleam in his eye as he leaned down, cupping her chin in his hand as he brought her dropping head to look at him. "Oh yes, they'll pay for those eyes all right." Not having the strength to do anything else, Hinata curled back her lips and spat in his face before her world faded and she collapsed on the deck. Ishio wiped his face, smirk still firmly in his expression as he did. HMPH, claws out as usual. Tie her up, boys, and secure her below deck. I'm sure you've already dealt with the medics. Aye, Captain. One of the pirates nodded as the others went about tying her up. Ishio nodded, turning to leave when he heard the man currently tying her ankles spoke. He, I'm sure we'll be enjoying this stuck-up little princess later tonight. I've always wanted to do it with a ninja girl. Turning sharply on his heel, Ishio smoothly grabbed a crossbow from another crewmate's back, aimed, and fired. The bolt the offending crew member through the N, the man gurgled, choking on his own B before he fell over the ship's railing, a splash soon accompanying his fall. All eyes turned to Ishio as the bearded man handed the crew member back his crossbow, his smile still there. I trust there'll be no more words so much as inclining to acquiesce the suggestion our former friend put forward. Yes. When no one said anything, the ship's captain nodded to himself before turning to the helm master. Change course east, we'll be heading to our stash so we can gather our supplies before heading south. Aye, Captain. The helmsman yelled before he turned the massive wheel, grabbing his hat as a powerful gust of wind suddenly blew over them. Aye, 'tis a good night for sailin'. Ishio commented to himself before he began making his way towards his quarters, listening to the men as they began to move the poisoned Hyuga. The gritty scraping feel of sand beneath her cheek was the first sensation Akina felt as she came to. Her body felt strangely numb as she pulled her arms up to push herself up off the ground. Before she could even start though, the crunching of sand beneath a boot reached her ears shortly before the person stepped in front of her. Her eyes took in the dark leather surface of the boot. A pit formed at the very bottom of her stomach as the heavy sound of a cloak caught in the wind reached her ears. This pit of dread deepened greatly as the color red filtered in through her peripheral vision. The angle at which she stared up at the intruder was awkward. But no matter how awkward it was, the idini was unmistakable. Naruto stared down at her, cloak draped over his shoulders, hands hidden beneath the lengths of fabric, hood and mask in the usual place. She scrambled backwards, grains of sand caught in the wind as she hurriedly stumbled to her feet. She ignored the shiver that crawled up her spine as the very edge of the sloshing waves nipped the back of her heel. As she reached for her kunai, she realized her pouch was missing. Cursing in surprise when she looked back at her older sibling, he was standing less than an inch away from her, towering over her much smaller form. Releasing a startled scream, she fell back into the water, choking as the salt water entered her mouth and nose, forcing her to sputter and cough as she rose above the surface again. She turned her blue eyes back onto Naruto, her breathing heavy and ragged with what she could only describe as fear as she looked up to his still silent form. For several moments the only sounds between the two siblings was the hissing of the waves as they came to and fro. Finally the former Kumo Kanoiki couldn't take the silence and yelled out to her brother. "What do you want?" His eyes bled into red, glowing in the shadows like rubies as the wind picked up and the skies darkened. When he spoke, his voice seemed to come from everywhere, echoing around her as the ground rumbled beneath her. "What I want," came the ghastly echo as his right hand slowly extended forward. The shaking of the earth became more violent, the sun that hung above them growing red as the clouded sky turned the same color. Akina's eyes darted left and right, staring in horrific awe. "What I want," he repeated as the ground behind him cracked, the sound deafening even as she covered her ears, clenching her eyes shut before turning them back to Naruto, noticing each one of his fingertips now covered in a deep purple flame. Fire rose from the cracks in the earth, the heat licking at her skin as screams, horrible, haunting screams, seemed to filter up from the earth. "What I want." The ground suddenly opened up beneath her and she could barely scream before the water washed over her. She felt herself sinking, deeper, deeper, the sight of Naruto fading into the bluish-green water of the ocean as she futilely tried to gasp for air. She felt herself twisting, moving, up and down, lost its direction in this place. She felt sick, her stomach twisting horribly as vertigo hit her. A voice reached her ears as she tried to open her eyes, coming to her like a mere echo. "Shush, N.A., be okay." More echoes, more shadows. As light came into her eyes, the only thing she was able to make out was a man's dark hair before her eyes closed again. Naruto's eyes languidly opened, bringing him away from his sleep, allowing his gaze to take in the full glory of the stone, cold ceiling of the cave he currently resided in. His ears twitched, filtering through the sounds of the crickets and other night creatures as the shuffling of feet, 5 or 6 men if he estimated the number correctly. Gathering chakra to his nose, the stench of alcohol, sweat and Hinata. Chakra was filtered into his ears, allowing the men's words to reach him. 4 were talking nonsense, but the 2 who appeared to be at the back of the group were an exception. "Man, I sure hope the Capien knows what he's doing. I don't like the idea of getting on Konoha's bad side. Please, do you really think that Devil King guy really even cares for this girl? He'll probably have her spot filled before he even gets word that she's missing. And even if he did care, do you really think he could track us down? We're pirates and he hired thousands of others in that battle. It could have been any of those guys. There's no way he'll find us. Now stop whining and let's get to the stash, we're falling behind." Naruto stood from his resting place, cracking his neck as he reached down for his cloak and mask. He could think of quite a few things that disproved those theories already. The thunderous sounds of something against the 50-foot-tall iron and wood gate of the Cloud Village was deafening, rising above the terrified battle cries of those already fighting on the wall. The seals that disrupted chakra did well enough to keep them at bay, but more and more were beginning to analyze and decipher the patterns of the chakra-disrupting seals. It would not hold them for long. Anbu Commander Koro stood in the courtyard, yelling orders to his men to bring more wood for the barricade. Somewhere in his mind, he could only ask himself one thing. How did it come to this? How is it that they now face extermination against this enemy? How is it that the once gentle, peace-loving village of Konoha had become the monstrosity that now descended onto the very doorstep. How is it that their cage was not here in their time of need? How is it that Konoha could have this many ninja in their reserves while they also needed to fight against Tsuna to the southwest? How is it that everything that they, the ninja of this village, hold dear and strive to protect, their families, their homes, now face imminent destruction? So again, how did it come to this? He was brought away from his thoughts as one of the Chunin rushed up to his side, an open wound along the left temple, dust and soot covering his face and clothing as he breathed deeply, eyes wide and frantic. Sir, he coughed, choking as he took in a deep breath, bridge breach at Sector 12. The enemy is pouring in, there are too many, the line is breaking. We need reinforcements. Everyone needs reinforcements. He snapped at the younger man before a deafening crack splintered the left side of the gate. The banging was increasing now, their opponents driven to a frenzy as they saw the first visible sign of the gate beginning to weaken due to the repeated impacts. Hold the gate, he yelled to several other Chunin who stood in the courtyard, watching as every man scrambled to find a spot against the gate, pouring their chakra to reinforce the wooden barrier. An explosion shook the earth beneath their feet, the bang momentarily drowning out everything else before the sounds came rushing back. The insistent banging against the gate accompanied by more splinters and cracks that pelted those in the courtyard with splinters. Sir, another Chunin yelled from a nearby rooftop. The walls aren't stopping em. They're beginning to swarm over the defenses. Before he could answer the younger man, a massive chunk of the gate came loose, launching towards him with the strength of whatever impact had snapped it free in the first place. Get down, someone else yelled before Koro and several others behind and around him hit the floor. The mass of wood came to a stop several yards into the street behind them. Koro looked back up to the gate, a hole protruding from the higher portion, where some kind of claw from what Hecold only guessed was a summoned animal was beginning to tear off more chunks of the wood. The banging increased now, almost like drums before one final deafening impact as the gate wide open, crushing several of the men as the massive wooden slabs toppled over them, crushing grown men beneath the nearly 2-ton weight. Now, he heard myself yell before hundreds of kunai, some with explosive tags, others without, were thrown through the now open portal. He couldn't see past the dust and smoke, but the flashes from the explosions and the screams of whomever they hit was more than enough to tell him we were hitting something. Over the chaotic sound something else reached his ears. Is that a flute? Something barged through the gate then, a humanoid beast with grey skin followed by 2 others. It carried a massive club, its long black hair covering its face as he swung the weapon, several of the terrified Chunin before they could react. The other 2, one who was tied up in bandages from head to waist, the last had cream-colored skin and bone spikes wrapped around his forearms which extended down towards his wrists and up to his elbow. The 3 15-foot-tall creatures tore into ninja squads, using their bi-and weapons freely as bi spilled onto the cobblestone streets. He moved to step forward when suddenly dozens of more Konoha ninja poured through the gate, engaging the disorganized, panicked men left at his disposal, easily see through them. The sound of the flute reached his ears again, more clearly this time, its haunting melody ringing loudly in his ears as he followed the sound, finding the source instantly as a gray-skinned, horned, red-headed woman. Stepping through the gate, her eyes were closed, focused on her instrument. Koro took a kunai from his pouch, hurling it at her, only to have the blade intercepted by one of the creatures, the edge simply bouncing off his hardened skin. Rounding to face the lone Anbu, the beast roared, raising its club high before it brought it down. He leapt away as it stone and brick beneath the massive weapon. Damn it! Koro cursed as he landed on one of the rooftops. Glancing around at the men who were quickly falling, there was only one order that came to mind. Fall back to the tower. Fall back. The cry was loud, going well over all other sounds. The men did not hesitate to obey, scrambling back through the streets, the Konoha ninja hot on their heels as the 3 beasts tore up the surrounding buildings. It was then when he realized that their only hope now is to save as many as they can. With the gate breached, it is only a matter of time before they leave their on the streets of the White City. As he turned to leave, a sudden searing sensation spread from the center of his sea to the rest of his body. Stumbling, he glanced down where a bone was sticking out. Then, he was yanked back, off his feet. Earth met sky in his eyes before I felt his body into the ground, a white-haired man standing over him. He kicked him in his side, forcing him to roll over, allowing him to yank out his weapon. Why was it suddenly so cold? He pushed the thought away from his mind as he saw the man step around him, marching into the gates of the village where Koro could already see smoke beginning to rise from within its walls. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.